Good afternoon and welcome to the Trust Fundraising Live with me, Beth Upton, and my special guest, Martha Awojobi. Hello, Martha. Before I ask Martha for a little introduction, I'm just going to remind you guys this is live, but if you haven't been able to watch us live today or you're watching live and you want to watch some back, all of these broadcasts are available on our YouTube channel. Just search for Money Tree Fundraising on YouTube. And we are live again on the third Thursday of next month, which is, by my calculation, Thursday, the 16th of June, on Twitter at Trust Fundraise, on LinkedIn, on the Money Tree Fundraising page, and as ever on the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook. But more importantly today, our first guest since I launched these events more than a year ago. And I want to say, hello, Martha, thank you for joining us. And do you want to tell the group a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Wait for this person to move on. Hi, everybody. My name is Martha. I use any pronouns. Yeah, I'm the CEO of JMB Consulting, which has been running for 2 years. But before that, I was a fundraiser. I mean, I'm still a fundraiser, but I spent 10 years doing fundraising, corporate partnerships, individual giving, community, even did some face-to-face fundraising at the start of my career. So I'm one of those people that had a go at every different type of fundraising, which I think is very cool. And yeah, started, changed career, started a consultancy that specializes in anti-racist practice. So looking at events, training, we do some recruitment, and of course I curate the BAMEOnline fundraising conference, and I feel like I should have led with that. I'm like, and side note, I curate this amazing conference.
And it is an amazing conference, and it is certainly, I imagine, in terms of your workload, very far from a side note. So I want to talk about that a little bit because I think, well, partly I want to make sure as many people as possible know about it. So I'm going to do the practical bit, which is this year. It is online. It is on the 28th of July. And if you cannot join the event live, then all of the sessions are available to catch up for up to a month afterwards. I think it's hosted on the Fundraising Everywhere site. It is.
It is the Everywhere Plus platform, which I feel like I keep saying Fundraising Everywhere, and they're like, Everywhere Plus.
Yes, Everywhere platform. I must get that right as well. Thank you. The program is available online. So if you just search BAMEOnline and you can see the program, and it is amazing. It's really challenging conversations that I think we don't have as a sector. When I go to fundraising conferences, particularly, it's look, I did this excellent thing and this is how you can replicate it. A lot of that, you know, there might be some chat for senior managers around difficult conversations and managing people, but it's pretty average, really. And I've really enjoyed watching the conversations over the last few years of BAMEOnline and talking about decolonizing our wealth and where all of that trust money comes from, thinking that this is a trust forum. And they're really difficult conversations when you then want to layer on ethics into your organization and be quite genuine in your ethics, and yet understand that's where you get your money from. In terms of cost, it is a pay what you can event so that it can be as accessible as possible. So we'd encourage you to pay what you think the event is worth. And yeah, I mean, I want to plug that everyone should buy a ticket and everyone should attend. And that's the kind of the plug bit. We'll do the plug again at the end, I think. Just in terms of interruptions, I've just realised my dog is going to be collected in about 15 to 20 minutes and my husband isn't home. So I will have to just leave through that door there and let my dog out.
I'll just keep it moving. I'll just start talking. Like, that's fine.
Very much. So, if anyone has any questions, just type them underneath whichever platform it is you're watching us, whether that's Twitter, LinkedIn or Facebook. The question should come through directly to us in our platform that we're broadcasting from. But I will, if you see me move this way, it's because I'm just double checking those platforms and making sure we're not missing anything. We've had a couple of questions pre-sent, and while everyone else is kind of gathering themselves and wondering what they might ask us, I'm gonna go with these ones. So the first one is, and I'm going to answer this, so don't panic, Martha. Any top tips for a multi-year funder that isn't Henry Smith or the lottery? So I would say that, I mean, lots of people ask this question, and the challenge is that funders are always changing their criteria. And also it's easier to get multi-year funding after you've had 1 year funding. So if you have never applied to, say, Garfield Weston, that's an example, before, then they won't just launch into a multi-year relationship with you out of nowhere. You've got to secure your 1 or 2 or 3 1-year grants, and then they will have built up enough trust to trust you with multi-year funding. So Garfield Weston is one, Steel Charitable Trust, Paul Hamlin, Esme Fairbairn, Paul Hamlin, again, I've written my own notes badly. They're the ones that spring to mind. But what I would say is that multi-year funding is great for us, and wouldn't it be great if more people do it, because it gives us certainty, but it isn't what funders like, particularly funders whose money is derived from the stock market, because they cannot guarantee what their returns on investment will be over that period of time. So it's very difficult for them to commit funding in advance. You know, if there was a stock market crash, they would be overcommitted, they would eat into their capital, that sort of thing. And also they want to, the good side of that is that they are then able to respond quickly and agilely to major world crises like COVID. You know, they all created these COVID emergency funds, and I'm sure Martha and I can have an interesting discussion as to whether the money went where it should have done. But, you know, they did. The thing they did that was brilliant was they all turned around really quickly as a group and went, oh, let's stop business as usual. This isn't a business as usual world. And they did change. And they were able to do that because their funds weren't pre-committed for multi-years. So that's what that would be my response there, which isn't, I'm sure, as easy an answer as everybody would like me to give. The next one, I wonder if you could lead on, actually. So it's a question that's come up about the phrase BAME. So I think there's 2 parts to the question. This organisation support people from what they currently call BAME communities, but they are trying to find ways to step away from calling them that. And that's the first part of the question, is what's some good language? So part that. And they've had discussions about that. But the second part of the question is explaining that change of language to funders. And I think that that's definitely something I've seen, is that, and something I teach, in fact, is that the easiest way to get a yes from a funder is to reflect their language back at them. But if their language is BAME, and hypothetically, before you answer your question, we agree that isn't great language, we're sort of perpetuating something there. So the second part of the question is how we discuss with funders. But what are your views on BAME as a catch-all, as a phrase, as a word? I don't know what we call it, a set of letters. A set of letters.
I mean, it's always quite ironic that I have a conference called BAMEOnline, but I personally don't ever use the phrase BAME. Once the name sticks, like, it's hard to unstick it, right? So I'm not like massively critical of people using terms like BAME. Like, every single term to use that is a catch-all term for people of color is problematic by lumping people of color together by definition. I think people who have a problem with the term BAME, a lot of that is because it's a term that was created by the government, and actually, you know, wasn't kind of a buy us for us kind of term. So people prefer people of color, but that's, you know, problematic in its own right. And I hear a lot what you're saying about wanting to mirror the language of funders. And there's not an easy answer, to be honest. I mean, what I would personally do is I would reflect the language back and then say, but we use this terminology, right? And you can reflect the language back a couple of times and say, BAMA groups, we refer to them as minoritized communities, or we refer to these people as racially minoritized, as a way to do a gentle challenge within your application, but also actually make it quite clear that you've heard what the funder has said. I don't think there is necessarily a perfect term. I think what we need to do is get used to naming specific problems for specific ethnic groups. There is no problem that kind of affects all BAME, I can't even say it anymore, BAME people in the same way. Usually you're going to need to disaggregate this anyway. So actually, I think the very fact that we're trying to lump all non-white groups into one shared experience is really problematic. We should be able to identify the experiences that Black groups have. And obviously, like, identifying whole groups as Black groups is problematic in itself, you know. Are you able to say that this is the Kenyan diaspora that we're talking about here, or actually this is Bengali women that we are talking about here? So being a lot more specific, I think, is really, really important. I don't think that's a clear-cut answer. I think there's something that you have to have these difficult conversations within your team and with people who know what they're talking about as well. I think often we want a quick answer right now, but actually it's not, it wasn't easy for me to decide I'm going to call my conference BAMEOnline, even though I don't agree with the terminology. We spoke about that within our organization and kind of, have those difficult and challenging conversations. But yeah, there's no correct term, and you should be more concerned with the structural issues that face these communities than what we're going to call them.
So, and I was taken with that because one of the terms you suggested is racially minoritized, and that really gets more to the heart of why a funder might want to separate BAME communities from non-BAME communities. Is they might not word it well, but they are recognizing that BAME communities, whichever ones of those that this particular charity is helping, are minoritized. They are deserving and requiring of additional support because of the structural inequalities that exist. And so maybe there's something around understanding what's behind that BAME and finding a phrase that helps the funder understand their core purpose. So I agree with you. I think BAME has become ubiquitous because the government used it, and a lot of grants in the good old days used to come from the government. And so a lot of grant makers and a lot of grant seekers have kind of aligned with that. And there's some shorthand there that isn't necessarily a bad idea. But yeah, of all the ones you use, the sort of racially minoritized that more focuses on the why are we calling out separate groups, really, well, it certainly appealed to me, but it just felt like that was a more justifiable term in terms of you're not just lumping people together because they're Black and minority ethnic, but you're lumping people together because they are minoritized. They do require additional something because of structural inequalities that exist. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also a nod towards the fact that like race is not a biological reality. Like this is a process that happens to people. You are racialized as white, and I'm racialized as Black. And I think actually we need to understand race as not just a social construct, but actually a process of othering, of ordering and categorizing. And I don't think the charity sector is in any place where it's able to acknowledge that. But actually, if we are using language like minoritized, racialized to show that this is a process, people start thinking, oh, that's an action word, rather than like a being. Something's happened to create this system of race, rather than like, oh, like you're Black and that's all you're ever going to be, and that's inherent to you, and therefore you have this set of characteristics that come with that biological.
We can't help it. We can't help the inequality that exists because you're Black, because it's just you happen to have different pigmentation in your skin, and therefore we have to accept that difference. Totally. Oh, so guys, I hope that this is the kind of conversation that you can watch happening when you buy your tickets for BAMEOnline, and I'd like all of us to have more of these conversations. So if anyone did want to come and join us and take part today, you're more than welcome to. Please don't feel afraid or frightened by the conversation. We just, and as Martha I think has just demonstrated really well, I don't think there are any easy answers, but that also means there are no hard wrongs. Well, there are some hard wrongs, that's absolutely abjectly untrue, but it's difficult to get it hard wrong if you're trying to unpick it and do the right thing. That's what I mean more by that. Thank you. Next question that's come up is, this is an interesting one. I haven't been asked this before. So, and I'd love your non-trust fundraiser opinion about this, right? So there are two.
Okay, I'll try. I'm so nervous with all of these questions I don't know are coming.
This isn't a trust fundraising question. This is a common sense question, and I would love your thoughts on it, right? So, two separate trusts, two completely unrelated boards of trustees. For convenience, they have both hired the same administrator. The administrator works part for one trust, part for another trust. But other than that, completely unrelated, like legally unrelated, completely separate, a decision-making process. Neither has any sort of template or form. And so when that happens, you tend to have a standard 2-pager you would send out to an organisation like that. And both of them happen to have criteria that suit this one organisation. So this woman's saying she sent out the standard template to one, and it's going to, let's call him Bob. It's going to Bob. And then she's realized that she would literally send the exact same document to Bob again. Do you think that's sensible, or do you think she should acknowledge it? What do you think she should do as a common sense answer?
I don't really know. Can you just say that whole situation again? I feel like I need time to actually understand what the situation was. Okay, go again.
2 separate trusts.
Yeah.
Administrator is the same person. Administrator is the same person. And the administrator's role is to accept applications, do the first sift to make sure they actually meet the trust criteria, and then hand them to the trustees who make the decisions. So this person will read both applications for 2 separate trusts. And if they were completely unrelated with different administrators, you would often send pretty much the same application to both, because you don't know enough about them to be able to tailor it. They haven't given you any criteria. Obviously you top and tailor it and reflect their language, but essentially it would be 2 very similar applications. So, but when you then know that the same person is going to read both, doesn't that feel a bit weird? Or are we making it feel weird and it isn't weird and we should just crack on with it?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like it's not that weird. I'm not entirely sure. I think this is a really, really unusual question that's made me think a little bit. I think because we kind of default to thinking like everything, the power is in the hands of like the funders, and like so you're really deferential to those funders. Like you have to impress them, even if it's for like a relatively kind of small grant, and also if it's what you need to write is exactly the same. Because of that weird power dynamic, this kind of situation would freak people out, right? So I personally would, our principal probably send very similar things, and but I feel really stumped by that question. I would send really similar things, being like out of principle, like I shouldn't be bending over backwards for this one administrator, but at the same time I would be feeling very nervous that like has this made this administrator feel like they have even more power to be able to like demand a dance from the fundraiser, right? It's made me think a lot about power. Yeah,
they haven't demanded it, and it makes me realize it's the power we confer on people, not the power they demand. Is so, and there's so many parallels with other parts of life where I see that's so true. I think you've said some really sensible things that I wouldn't have even thought of. It is only £1,000 grant, right? And you have to also think about your profit margins. I know we're in charity, but there's an amount of time that you are paid for to do this work, and there needs to be some spare out of that £1,000 once they've paid your salary. So I would, even without talking to you and understanding why, and thinking about those power dynamics, which is fascinating, I would have sent the same thing, and I would have done a little cover email to the administrator going, I know you've already seen this for such and such trust. They've got such similar aims. If you want something different, could you guide me? Otherwise, I think these are perfect for both sets of trustees. And I would present as confident that I'm doing the right thing, even if I was having the collywobbles. I'm confident this is my application for both sets of trustees.
I think I'd make a little joke.
Yeah.
Like, hi again, me again. But there was actually in the first BAMEOnline conference, we had a conversation about navigating powerful funders, which was 3 kind of corporate major donor and trust fundraisers talking about that expectation to be deferential to your funders, right? And that we think that funders have all the power when, like, they have the money, and we equate money with power. And yes, in many ways it is, but we have the expertise. And we sometimes forget that, like, having a bunch of money doesn't mean that you know stuff, right? It means that you have a bunch of money. Like, it means that you've got lots of money, right? Yeah. If we're looking about kind of how money is accumulated over time, and actually that normally being because of violence and exploitation and extraction more often than not, particularly with trust and foundations. But we do think this person's got the money, therefore they should know the answers, and we have to like pander to them. And I think, there is a culture of that being true, but also, we believe it, so we make it true more often than not. I mean, I've been pulled up many times when I worked in fundraising roles because I've been too direct with funders. I've spoken too kind of real about structural issues. I've not used the soft language, and we still got the money, but everyone was like, oh my gosh, like we have to do things, you know, in the way that funders want. And I think, yeah, it is that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy at times.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And slightly straying out of trust's world, but stuff that's totally relevant to the audience is around power dynamics within organizations and as well. So if you've had experience where you've been told to soften your language, gosh, I have too, and not necessarily only externally, like the kind of pipe down, be deferential to your seniors is, I think, extraordinarily prevalent within our fundraising world, more so than in the private sector. And we've seen it over the last, well, I've certainly seen it over the last couple of years where there's some brilliant campaigns that have started coming online. So obviously Charity So White, which Martha is involved with, is one of them, not just NCVO. But before that, I'm thinking specifically the Show the Salary campaign is a really good example where this group of people anonymously, because they wanted to protect their jobs. And that's, you know, that in and of itself is massive, right? We had to create an anonymous Twitter handle and an anonymous Gmail account because we were literally scared that we wouldn't get a job if we challenged this really bad practice. I think that says a lot. And I was a supporter of that, and obviously I'm in a different position, so I don't have to be anonymous. And I ended up going toe to toe with one of the big kind of people in our sector who used to be a director of fundraising at one of the big top 10 charities, used to be senior in the Institute of Fundraising and all of that stuff. And actually had people telling me I should be more reverential towards them, that I should be more respectful because they'd raised loads of money and because they had the position they had. And I was like, except that they're perpetuating really unhealthy behavior. And I want to challenge that. And I think there's a lot of that in our sector that's really quite awful, quite poisonous, frankly. And if it's happening internally, and then you take that across to a trust fundraiser who's at a mid-level in an organisation or quite a junior level in an organisation, that's an inbred behaviour by the time they're then going to a funder.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, I mean, it mirrors the way our sector is set up to separate people. I think, you know, it's the people who help and the people who are helped, and we never think that we could ever cross over into also being the people that need help, that kind of us and them, which is, yeah, I think the bread and butter of the idea of charity and of giving is that kind of divide. And I think we really need to have a conversation with ourselves about like what are the bones of the charity sector, and a lot of it is like that us and them. But I think there are lots of people that want that to change. And I hear you. You know, there is that expectation to be deferential to people who have been perpetuating like harmful funding practices, harmful working practices. But I see a lot of things changing. You know, Show the Salary is a great example. Yeah, I'm very, very hopeful. And I think, you know, people using the internet, people using Twitter, particularly when we all went into lockdown, it was like suddenly like a veil, not suddenly, veils have been shifting for a long time, but like actually the amount that people were able to say in such a short period of time about how things could change was, yeah, quite magnificent. I think it's tired everyone out now, like totally. Like the way that we were all trying to change things so quickly did kind of mirror the urgency of the charity sector anyway. But it really stuck a wedge in the door that is not closing. So I'm really excited to see how we continue to talk in the mainstream charity sector. Like I know these conversations are happening in BAMEOnline and at Charity So White and all of that, but I hear more and more conversations about power happening in the mainstream, which is something that I'm not used to. Whether or not they're performative and authentic is a different story. That's for us to find out later. But getting to a point where we can talk about these things, like me and you, quite openly without people harassing us, like, is something.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I'm sure there is a percentage that is performative. There's a percentage that's performative of all things. I guess where I try and remain positive, and I would say that I've had a lull in my ability to feel positive over the last probably year, having started off. I think you're right. There was this massive surge, wasn't there? And then we were all exhausted, never mind anything else. And then we realized that change is hard as well. But where I always try and cling to the fact that if there's a percentage of performative stuff going on, then underneath it's like the old iceberg thing, like the stuff you see that's performative, there's probably loads going on where people aren't saying, hey, look at me, look what amazing stuff I'm doing, and they're just cracking on with it and doing it. And if the people who are being performative feel obligated to pretend, that means that the seas are changing, right? That things are shifting, even though they might not be shifting for the people who are pretending to care, but it means that the people who are pretending to care are seeing the world shift around them and are trying to maintain their relevance. So I think it's a positive
Well, we'll see. I mean, they always say, right, oppression just shifts to fit the norms of the day. And that could very well be happening right now. You know, I've seen some stuff today of some quite large organizations getting involved in work around power and integrity, and I'm like, are you the right people to be doing that? And you know, I'm I'm an optimist, right? And I will not let anything turn me into a pessimist ever. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this work, right? I'm an optimist, but a little bit suspicious. But I love being proved wrong. I love when people surprise me and aren't as oppressive as I think they're going to be. So yeah, I remain hopeful. I think there are interesting questions happening in fundraising, but at the same time, that is going to be met with a lot of resistance, right? A hell of a lot of resistance. And when we have a government that is backing the side of resistance to change, like it's going to be, I think it's going to be a difficult 5 years ahead, where we try and decide what the identity of the charity sector is, particularly fundraising and philanthropy. We have to make a split from white supremacy, yes. But we're not doing a great job thus far. But I think we have options. Yeah. So yeah, I'm feeling optimistic because I see that there is a clear opportunity to make a choice.
I'm glad you see it. We've got one more question and then we have to wrap up. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows, I've just double checked the programme, and there is a session that you'll be involved with called Beyond the Performance, the Realities of Doing Anti-Racist Work, as part of BAMEOnline. And I think, well, that's definitely one that I'm going to be making sure I watch live if possible, so I can take part in any chat. But and for those who aren't familiar with the online conference format that Everywhere Plus promotes, is that there are 2 rooms, there are 2 tracks, and they tend to happen simultaneously, so you have to pick. And that's the other reason why having it available to watch back over the next month is important, because you can literally only watch half the content, even if you dedicate your whole day to it. One last question, which is around core admin cost contributions on applications. This person says this is something they haven't done before at their organisation, is something they're now considering. So this is the idea that you've got your project costs, and then you would add a percentage on top of that to contribute towards the centralised costs of your organisation. You can call it core, you can call it admin, you can call it central, you can call it what you like. They're asking for examples, which I can't give specific examples because I'm not allowed to talk about my clients. And reference materials on the maximum that should be applied to, or an industry standard. So my advice to this person is there isn't an industry standard, and there shouldn't be. That you have your centralized costs, and then you have X number of projects around it, and that you should sit with a finance person and work out a fair distribution of your centralized costs across all of your work. Because if that central core disappeared, those projects couldn't happen. So it is fair, but you might have 1 mega project and 5 small projects. So putting the same amount across all of them wouldn't be fair. But you might do that and work out that, if all of your projects contributed an additional 10%, that would be fine, or an 8% or 9% or whatever. I think in order to get it, it has to be a real number. Like all budgets, you have to do quotes and have real numbers. And I always recommend to our clients that they sit with their finance person, they work that out, and then they keep that spreadsheet somewhere so that it is a justifiable figure. So that if someone comes back to them and says, this seems like a big number, where did that come from? You go, well, if you want our excellence here, and part of the reason that we're absolutely brilliant at this type of project is that we do this campaigning work, and our campaigning work has to go into our centralized costs, and did you know fundraising costs money, and X, Y, and Z, then it's justifiable, and you start that dialogue. And I think it goes back to what Martha brought up earlier, which I'd love to explore in another one of these sessions with trust fundraisers, is that power dynamic. We should have the confidence to say, if you don't pay to keep the lights on, the building closes. And if the building closes, none of that happens, none of it. And all of those conversations. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, 10% is a brilliant number. I've known organisations successfully get grants where they've put in 18%. And I've known other organisations who've put in a blanket 10%, not done the maths, and had a no. So it is about the justifiability of it. And I hope that's really helpful. So on closing, just to remind you guys, the next one of these lives is the 16th of June. We've got a guest who's going to be talking to us about finance, governance, budgeting, any of that financy stuff you want to talk about for trusts, then come along on the 16th of June. As always, if you can't join live, submit your questions in advance and we'll put them in the broadcast. This video will be live on YouTube in a couple of days, and all our past ones are available, and the same will be true next month. And buy your BAME online tickets 28th of July, and watch what you can live, because there is chat and it is interactive, and it's much more kind of meaningful, I think, in my opinion. It might not be meaningful for you, I realise, to do it on the day, and then go and watch the rest of it back afterwards. Martha, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it. I really
thank you for having me.
Chat. They go much quicker.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to see you. And yeah, thanks everyone for your questions and for listening.
Brilliant. Bye, everyone.
Bye.